Hello, welcome to the Psychic Stories podcast, encouraging conversations about mental health. Today I'm speaking to Amelia Wrighton and Emma Morris-Rowe. Amelia and Emma are the founders of Suicide&Co, a charity that supports those bereaved by suicide. Amelia and Emma, hello.
Hi.
Hi.
How are you both?
Very good, thank you.
Good.
Yeah, very well.
Good. Well, great to have you on. The goal of today, we're going to have an open and honest conversation about both of your mental health journeys and what led you to start the amazing organisation that is Suicide&Co, and to get some insight into the tools and techniques that have helped you along your, along the way for you, and they're accessible to other people. And by discussing your journey, we hope to share and normalise these very difficult conversations about mental health. There's often people are not alone in these experiences, and in the topic of suicide, they are definitely not alone in these experiences. Does that sound good to you?
Super.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I'd love to hear about your mental health journeys. Emma, perhaps we start with you.
Yep. So, I mean, gosh, me and Amelia talk about our own mental health and everyone else's mental health all the time. So what do I think about my own mental health journey? I think the best place to start is I'm very lucky. I've got generally very good mental health. I'm hyper aware of how I feel and how everybody else makes me feel. Some might say I'm overly sensitive, but because I do feel things really deeply, I am really in tune with where my mental health is. And I think something that we often talk about is it's not just your own mental health that can impact your journey and your understanding of mental health. It's often the people around you and their mental health and how that impacts on your life and your journey and the paths that you end up on. Because, I mean, we'll go into detail a little bit more about the charity later, but I know that myself and Amelia would not be doing this and helping other people bereaved by suicide if my dad didn't have such huge struggles with mental health and as a byproduct eventually died because of poor mental health and suicide. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at with it.
Yeah, but I mean, first thing to say is like it's amazing to have a conversation, with both of you, and to talking about this very difficult topic. Both of you have been bereaved by suicide, and it's I mean, frankly it's horrendous, and I can't imagine the tragedy that and the emotions that you went through, and I've spoke to you quite a lot before, and you are the most kind of like energetic and humorous and fun individuals, and it's a conversation which I assume that wasn't always the case. And perhaps Emma, maybe just to dive a little bit deeper, in that particular situation with your dad, that must have been I can't even imagine, that must have been a horrendous experience for you.
Yeah, I think traumatic and hideous and horrendous and just earth-shattering. And anybody who's experienced suicide will totally resonate with that. But from vulnerability and from us talking about it, it can only improve the experience of other people. But I think the impact that it had on my mental health, and still does, it's funny little quirks that you don't really pick up on unless you're having the conversation. So things like if I get a text message saying call me now, I will never think, oh, that person needs to speak to me. My brain will instantly go 20 steps forward to worst case scenario of death. And when we speak about that preemptive trauma and preempting the worst, that's a really normal byproduct on my mental health. And it's just that, I think heightened anxiety about people in your life and people that you care about, and it's a brilliant thing because that vulnerability means that you love way deeper and you feel much more. But on the other side of that is it's crippling fear that something bad's going to happen again.
And is there something that like you've learned to cope with that crippling fear, and when a situation, if someone does say call me now, even if it's completely innocuous, you will say okay, there's a steps that you will take which will assess whether actually this is as bad as you think, and almost bring your mind back a bit so that fear can recede a bit.
Yeah, totally. So I think there's two things I do. So one is make people around me in my circle or bubble, which feels appropriate. That they know that is how I react. So you're always better to either call me if it's something urgent, and that sort of open dialogue there. And then also stepping back and breathing and going, okay, so it happened one time, but out of the millions of phone calls that you've had in your life, it's not happened any of the other times, touch wood. So it's that little bit of perspective and stepping back and processing just taking that count to 10 approach.
And Amelia, is that similar to your experience? So I'd be interested to see, you've had two, you know, on paper they're similar experiences, but I assume because you're different people, because situations were different, they manifest themselves in completely different ways.
That specifically on that, fast forward to the worst case scenario anxiety, oh my God, live and breathe that all the time. Even had a situation this morning, a friend of mine, having gone on a date from online, hasn't messaged me in like an hour. I'm immediately at worst case scenario.
Right. And that's a natural way of your mind responding now.
Yes. Yeah. And I mean, it's been 10 years since I lost my mum. So at the start, it was a lot worse. And I would describe it probably like therapeutically as like catastrophic thinking. Like I would always go to like, oh my God, this is what it is. But I think the same. Like I try and breathe. It's an area I need to improve. I can definitely resonate with that. But that's a very similar experience that I have.
Yeah. And are you seeing with the people that you are working with in your community, like that is something that manifests itself, and there are a lot of commonalities, which actually there's tools out there, like you say, for example, breathing exercise is something straightforward, which actually can be just really, really helpful, and they're free, right? I mean, air is free currently.
Yeah. Definitely commonality, like the little things that are cropping up as we go on this journey that are so similar, like anniversaries, like different things that we'd react, you know, things around abandonment and stuff. Those are definitely similarities that are popping up, that we're still very early in our journey, but we are seeing them kind of crop up. And I think being able to understand how different people tackle them is what we're really trying to do, so that we can kind of build those recommendations with, you know, apps like Sidekick and things like that now being out there. It is easy to get access. It's just about knowing that they're there, I think.
And for your particular experience, Amelia, like, is that, you say about 10 years ago, is that something that, and perhaps a question for both of you, did you, I assume you both went through some very difficult times in terms of your own mental health, and is that something that you were able to process? Because you know, specifically with Suicide&Co, this is a lot is grief related, but it's a supercharged, complicated grief. There's a lot of other things that come along with it, and is that something that you needed support to get through, or was it something that you were able to navigate on your own?
I mean, for me, like looking back, I didn't get as much support as I would have liked. I also didn't really actively look very far. Like 10 years ago, I wasn't like aware of any communities on Instagram. It wasn't integrated into my natural life. Like it wasn't easy for me to find. But I mean, there were significant things that I needed a lot of help with that I kind of ended up having to deal with on my own, or dealt with further along. Like one of the things that I always think that's really relevant to like Sidekick and what you guys are doing is gratitude journaling. For me was the thing that I would say in the first 6 months took me through being able to keep my feet on the ground and kind of just manage, because I just felt like the unluckiest person ever. I just couldn't see, you know, anything good. And somebody suggested writing down at the start of every day and at the end of every day 3 things that I was grateful for, tiny things. And at the start, I'd be like, nothing, like, I'm not. And this sucks. As time went past, I was like, I'm grateful I caught my bus. I'm grateful that that person sent me this. I'm grateful. And it built up, and I did it for about 2 years. But in the first 6 months, it was really a huge, and I didn't realize until after it how helpful as an exercise it had been.
And Emma, did you find that in particular? Because I assume what Amelia was talking about as well is that, you know, doing that writing down, it starts off with nothing, and then it's actually it's reprogramming your mind to kind of think, I suppose, optimistically, that actually, you know, looking out, there is a little bit of hope despite this tragedy, which is in the past or just behind us, just behind you.
Yep. So, I mean, I still journal now, but actually when it happened in the early stages, I just didn't want to do any sort of acceptance that I was going through that. I was still at uni, and ironically, I was doing English literature, and one of my modules was about existentialism. So there was lots of writing about suicide and Beckett and Camus and all of that. But for me, and we've spoken about this at length before, but I just shut everything out for a good year. So I just chose to put my energy into looking after other people. So my mum's incredibly strong and brilliant, and I still had grandparents then, and I've got a younger sister who was still at school doing her GCSEs. So I just chose not to focus on any of the emotions that were going on inside and just externally put my focus in.
Did you do that intentionally? Like you said, right, I you know, and perhaps it was, I can't, at the moment, I'm not going to deal with myself. That can come later. Or is that your character? Is that something that you will say, actually, I'm going to look after other people first? And you need to remind yourself that you need to look after yourself.
Oh gosh, yeah, totally. Yeah. And even now, I'm always the first.
Amelia nodding.
I am nodding. That you.
I've got this like visceral empathy where.
Yeah, that's a good thing, right?
Yeah, it is a good thing. But also, when I was thinking about today's conversation, I was thinking about the biggest part of my mental health now that I always keep a close eye on is how much I'm giving of myself to other people. Because as much as I'm an extrovert and I love all of that, and I get a lot of energy from other people, I'm always giving more energy than I ever received. And it's that so I think all my efforts went into making sure everyone around me was fine. And then as that got into the right position and as the years went on, I definitely started researching techniques like journaling and the grateful side of things, and also just talking and not necessarily having to talk to a therapist, but talking to siblings who've been through the same thing, or talking to friends who haven't been through it but they knew you before and they know you now. And just, I think the power of talking is undeniable.
And it's interesting. I actually relatively recently listened to a philosophy podcast. I do like my philosophy podcast on Albert Camus. And I'd be interested, you know, Amelia, like from, you know, not from, let's say, a kind of an existentialist philosophical kind of like debate or anything like that, but did you find that kind of looking into and researching how other people, philosophers, had experienced or had kind of come to terms with these kind of tragedies was helpful? I mean, it certainly, I mean, I haven't experienced suicide by bereavement, but I do experience suicidal thoughts. And for me, that reading about it kind of helped. I don't really know why, it just did. But did it help you?
So actually, the only research that I did in the first couple of months was around what happens after death and what different religions believe, because I had grown up in a way that I was like, I got christened, I kind of did that whole thing, I got confirmed, and I really only did it because I was being told to do it and my friends were doing it, and I was like, fine. I really didn't. I went to church at Easter and Christmas, and that was it.
Free wine, right?
Yeah. So then exactly. So then mummy died, and everybody around me, just little things that they were talking about would be like, oh my God, look at those geese flying in a V, that's mummy. And I'd be like, what? Like, I don't understand. And then people would be like to me, I can feel her. And I'd be like, I can't feel her. And then I would be there being like, I can feel her. This is weird. Is she watching? I had a real crisis of like, I don't understand what I believe in and what I want to believe in either. And if I'm being totally transparent, I don't have that still absolutely nailed down. But it was a real area for me that I was just like, and that was where I dug into. And I dug into it more from like what happens after death and what different religions believe in, much more than anything really around specific bereavement and how people were kind of dealing with it. But that was kind of the area that I dug into.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting. You talk about, you know, you talk about faith as well. Like there's actually, I mean, faith is you know, is one provides a foundation for people's beliefs. There's a lot of wisdom in faith. I mean, it's been around for thousands of years, and these kind of ideas and thoughts bring, you know, even if you're not religious, they bring comfort. And I've seen people who have had tragedies in their lives that have had a faith, and when you talk to them, there's, you know, do you believe? They're like, well, I don't know if I believe. But actually, it comes back to that philosopher Pascal's dilemma. It's like, well, actually, I may as well believe, because, you know, if there is something, I much rather believe in it. And you know what? It brings some level of comfort to me in very difficult situations. And frankly, that can only be a good thing.
I agree. I felt jealousy I felt jealousy of the assurance that people had in their religion and their belief. I felt jealousy that I didn't have that, and I didn't know. It made me feel very like at the time I just wanted something. The philosophy side of things, I'm not like literally no expert in, couldn't even tell you anything on that. But from a faith perspective, that is definitely a journey that I went on where I was just confused ultimately.
Yeah. And do you find that because I might be wrong, I think you both will know the facts better than me, but for those who've been bereaved by suicide, is there a higher propensity of having suicidal thoughts and ideation?
Yeah.
And in if you don't mind me asking, going back to kind of the old Samaritan days, were those thoughts present, and if they were, how have you dealt with them?
So should I go?
Yeah.
I mean, so yeah, I've just come off the all-party parliamentary group for suicide prevention.
Wow.
And a study's been shown, and it's like the biggest study on those bereaved by people in the UK, and they saw that 8% had of those bereaved by suicide had made a suicide attempt, and 23% had, I think it's 23, it's low 20s, had suicidal ideation. So it's definitely something that is much more prevalent within this bereavement. For me personally, I didn't have any suicidal ideation, and I, on the flip side, was just totally shell-shocked by it as a concept, and really tried to dig into what it was and what those feelings could be like. And I feel eternally grateful that I haven't had that deepest, darkest feeling. I've obviously read a lot about it. I've spoken a lot about it. I've talked to a lot of people about it. But for me in that scenario, I couldn't understand it at the time. And that was heartbreaking to me. I couldn't understand somebody's point, their mental health getting that low, and at the initial raw time, that made it so much more isolating and incomprehensible to me. It was very challenging.
And with those already very difficult emotions, I can imagine that people on your faith side of things saying, oh, that's her, I can feel her. That's not, I mean, at the time for you, I can imagine that's not very helpful, and actually would lead to more anger and frustration. Yeah.
I think that faith is part of the leads into the isolation unintentionally, and also cross-generationally. Like, we talk about this a lot when in the immediate aftermath of a bereavement, when often the closest network is cross-generational. You've got, especially now when we're talking about stigma and everything like that, you've got people that are dealing with things in completely different ways. The way that I deal as a 19-year-old to death and stigma in comparison to the way that my 80-year-old granny deals with it is obviously very different. And I think that all kind of plays into part of that that isolation.
And Emma, what was your experience?
So, well, before I give you that, I've just got a point on that. I think it's so interesting when we talk about faith and spirituality and religion. So my dad was from a hardcore Roman Catholic Irish family, and there are multiple suicides across generations. And part of the problem is none of them ever wanted to talk about it. So then even at the funeral in a big grand Roman Catholic church, everyone's mortified and horrified and really shocked and saddened, but still it is not enough to make them open up and talk about the pressures of the church or all those interesting...
Is that because of the judgment they feel?
Judgment and shame, Catholic guilt. It's all it's interesting. And although I was brought up so my dad was hardcore Roman Catholic, her mum is a self-proclaimed atheist and always has been. She always goes down the route of you should believe in people, and you should believe in love and that sort of idea. But I am quite spiritual, so I'm not religious by any means. But me and Amelia often laugh. So signs, I'm one of those people. I would never say it to somebody else if it's not their cup of tea. But yeah, I mean, I saw 2 hawks in central London in over 2 days, And I obviously Googled what that meant. So I'm like, I love that sort of comfort. And it's not necessarily just my dad. We've lost grandparents and across the board. Yeah. But what was the question? What was your other question about?
Well, I think, I mean, you explained that point really well, and I think it was just going back to understanding that kind of idea around the kind of your own experience around suicidal thoughts or ideation in relation to those statistics, knowing that maybe people are listening who've been suffered by bereavement by suicide might not understand the feelings or the thoughts that they're thinking. They might have just emerged and come from nowhere, and I think that's it's a complicated thing to navigate, right?
Yeah, it's so complicated, and with our community growing by the day of people who, like myself and Amelia, who've lost parents or siblings or friends or cousins to suicide, we hear so many different experiences. But as Amelia said, I'm really lucky and really grateful that I've not got any understanding of how the brain can do that and trick you into thinking that the world would be a better place without you. Because from somebody on the other side, it absolutely will never be better no matter what has gone on or whatever has been said. There is no way that the world would be a better place without every imperfect individual in it. And so I struggle with that, and I think that's where a lot of my anger and disbelief came from, because I just always think, and it's difficult because as we are in our 30s and as life gets harder, we have more and more friends who do open up to us about dark thoughts and suicidal ideation. And it's hard because as much empathy and love towards it you go, I can't understand that. So please, like, whatever you are thinking, please know that is wrong. So it's hard. In some ways, I wish that I could feel like that for 1 second and then for someone to take it away from me, so that I would just be more prepared to have those conversations and eloquently say, I'm sat here with you because I understand. And I can't say that currently.
And that must be, that you said, must be a level of frustration of especially for someone like you said who's very empathetic and would care about someone, like to not being able to put yourself in that shoes, and especially with such a close loved one. That must be a very complicated thing to navigate in your mind.
I think there's such delicacy around this area, especially going into the suicide bereavement area. There's a reason why a lot of people that lose loved ones to suicide go into prevention. They never want anybody to do that, and they never want anybody to go through what they're going through. And Emma and I, on a 2-year journey this has been, are constantly like, oh, well, we want to go and help this effort, but we have to kind of look at trying to help, what's at home first, so that we can help people further. And on that bereavement side of it, the understanding is incredibly difficult. And over the 10 years, I've read like tons of self-help books. I've read so much on suicidal ideation. I've had friends come to me and have these conversations because we're more open. And I genuinely believe if you hold empathy as an individual, you can have a conversation around suicidal thoughts, and you can have a conversation around suicide bereavement. You can say, I'm fucking angry, or I'm feel so much guilt that this person has died. Or you can say, I am struggling so much in myself, I can't think about moving forward with this week. I can't think about moving forward with this day. Having a conversation with somebody that has empathy and that loves you is genuinely part of that solution. And it is always scarier on the side of not having it. When you get into it, I genuinely think most people can guide each other through as individuals.
And you don't need to be experts. And I think that this happens more and more, especially around, like you said, very delicate topics. I think, another one is suicide. The other one is eating disorders as well. When you have experience, when there are people who are experiencing these very, very difficult things, saying nothing is not an option. And unfortunately, that seems to be the default. People don't talk about. You've got to, even if you get it wrong, that's fine. But asking how someone is, how they are, do they want to talk, it's got to be that first step.
Totally. Do you think that's a bit of a British problem? Of, well, that's someone else's business, or don't air your dirty laundry, and all of those awful things that are ingrained into British culture.
I'd agree there's some element of cultural, but I think the example that you brought up, especially around, let's say, faith and particular religions, which, especially on the topic of suicide, look at it very negatively. That can't help, right? And these religions are worldwide. So there is, especially around certain topics, a general feeling in certain communities that we are not going to talk about this. And actually, we did I had a conversation with someone who lost their brother by suicide on an earlier episode in the Southeast Asian community. Very similar. Judgment. What will the parents, what will the neighbors think? What will the parents think? And these people, this family, have basically never talked about it and will not talk about it. They know they're not going to, and they're processing it in their own way. I respect that. That's their decision, but personally, I can see a better solution, and it's what we're talking about now. It's these kind of conversations where you have to open up. You've got to talk to your siblings, talk about how are you getting on. You've got to talk to the parent who's been bereaved. Like you've got to, because otherwise, well, then the question is, unless it's too painful. That's the other thing, unless it's just too much.
My thing that I say to any friend that asks me or anything like this is I encourage the person supporting. So the person that's noticed a problem, or this person that knows that their friend's just been bereaved or can see somebody, to have the impetus to start those conversations. Because I see so often somebody has got pissed and they've said some stuff when they're drunk that everyone's going to be like, oh, that's a bit intense. Or they've sent a bit of a mean message, or they've done something that's like, that looks like a little bit of a call to help. The courage it takes to start that conversation again when you are in a difficult place is like climbing a mountain. And if you're the other side, you can throw a ladder, throw a rope. It takes nothing for you to say, hey, mate, like, do you want to have a chat? Like, I noticed you did this. Is there anything I can help you with? Like, and it's not putting a level of responsibility on that person. It's just encouraging that first reach out. And if they don't take the line, then that's fine. And then if you remember in your normal routine and you can think to do it again, just try again. Because I see the hardest conversations sometimes, unfortunately, are when you've got two people that are in bad situations together. So me potentially talking to somebody in my close family after the bereavement was harder, right? My grief feels like this, and your grief feels like this, and I don't have a mum, and you don't have a daughter, and we're then going like this. But then sometimes it's difficult. Whereas if you're talking to somebody outside, you can allow yourself to have that moment and that release. And part of the thing I'd always said to Emma when we started Suicide&Co, if society could be like my friends are, my close group of friends, because I'm a big talker, we would not have a need for Suicide&Co. We would not have a need for these charities, because everybody we've been through as a group of friends a bunch of different awful stuff as young adults. And it's made us the way that we are. And that is, if we can all get to that, we won't need to rely so much on these organizations. There's so much we can do within ourselves.
And Emma, just turning back to you about the question that you were kind of raising about, do you think it's a British thing? Is that something that you felt? Have you found any difficulties within your kind of, let's say, close group of friends or extended group of friends or family? Amelia, sounds like you've got this a very tight group where people have gone through some very difficult things. Is that similar to you, Emma?
So we've got a really strong small family unit. So that's kind of the centre and the heart of all of my support 10 years ago. And it still is a huge part now, even though new people come into your life and support networks grow. I think it's probably quite an interesting place to talk about regionality and the impact that that's had on our different journeys. So no prizes for guessing I'm a Northerner and Amelia's not. And there's definitely a different dialogue. So I've been in London 8 years, and my partner's a Southerner as well. And it's interesting. I don't know if it's a class thing. I don't know if it is if it's a location thing. But the conversation around suicide and mental health when I was in the North was a lot more restricted than it is down in London. So I when I lived outside of London, I never remember anyone saying, oh, I suffer with panic attacks, or oh, I have anxiety, or I have manic depression. It just wasn't a conversation. I don't know if that's an age thing or a location, or it could be
a cultural thing, like you said.
Cultural thing, yeah. And I just remember, because I'm from Bradford, and just a very different conversation, a non-existent conversation, or a judgmental conversation from my experience. And then London, I mean, we are lucky to live in a liberal society down here, and the conversation is more fluid, and that's something that we're really aware of when we are doing outreach and when we're pulling people into the Suicide&Co journey with us. We want to be representative of the entire UK. So that is why with our help hub, there's lots of different writings from people all over the UK. And but I do think that there is something quite British around it's not my problem, and I can't bear that. I think it's everybody's problem. If there's a society,
quite an individualistic way of thinking.
And it's just never the way to progress. I think we talk about self-care a lot at the charity, because we really believe that self-care is important to everyone's mental health and just general happiness. But I do think there's something around communal care as well. And as Amelia said, be brave, like have that conversation. What's the worst that somebody says to you? Sorry, you're caring about me too much, stop it. Like, that's never, no, the worst thing is somebody goes, I don't want to talk about it, and
which is okay.
Yeah, that's fine. But can you imagine being the person who wasn't brave enough to have those difficult, challenging conversations, and then fast forward and that person isn't around anymore because they didn't have anyone to offer that ladder or that rope, like Amelia said. And
do you find, because like as you was talking, I was thinking, I'm not sure if there's any regional kind of data or kind of disparity between are more regions more predisposed to instances of suicide, or I mean, do you feel, and this might be a very controversial question, but screw it, I'll ask it anyway. Like, do you think that there is an element that society has a responsibility, that what we are doing in Britain as a culture, or in the world as a culture, in the way that the world is structured, is leading people who are vulnerable, maybe in their minds, maybe it's how they're wired, that they're actually being led, or it is easier down to a path that would lead to something like suicide? Is it something that is a very personal thing, or is it something that actually, you talk about working with the APPG, is it something that government has to address as an underlying symptom of whatever structure of society is spewing out at the moment? It's a big question. You don't have to answer.
It's a big question, right? It's huge. But I mean, like, ultimately, yes. Like, I think there's so many different factors. I mean, I have this conversation with myself all the time. I'm like, the amount of support that is going into the space is increasing so much, and yet suicide rates are going up.
Yeah, exactly.
So, last year, I talk about some dummy maths that I did from the charity register, from a charity specifically. This isn't talking about government funding. 34 million was raised for suicide prevention last year, in comparison to 400 grand for suicide bereavement. Now, I raise that because, for every suicide, 135 people are, bereaved or affected. So you can see the multiplication of the numbers, right? But when we think about suicide prevention, these numbers are still going up, and there are so many contributing factors, and there are so many people calling for change. And I genuinely believe we are moving too slowly when we look at the government and policy change and everything like that. I think we are moving too slowly, would be my whole thing. I also think we could conduct a huge number of research projects into this space, because it is a very individual experience. But so there's more helplines, there's more ways to get in touch with people than there's ever been before, and people still aren't accessing those services. And if they are, potentially they're not as strong as they could be. And so, yes, I think we all need to do more and move faster.
But do you think, like you said, with the the helplines, call centre, charities, like that, those are there because there's a need, there's a demand for it, because that, as a society, is there a way that you can see for us to be preventative? Is it something where early intervention helps, supporting people as children to have better childhoods, so that these kind of thoughts and ideations, okay, they may still emerge, but they can be dealt with in a way that doesn't lead to the act of suicide?
Well, this is slightly controversial of me to say, but one thing that I think is really weird in this space and difficult, it's a challenge that I don't have the answer to, is that all of the proof of all of these different services are conducted by the services themselves, right? Because there is not a central ability to do that from a data point of view. So if you die in hospital and you've had a terminal illness or you've had an illness, you can see if the person has died from an illness, all of the different treatment they have received. Does that make sense? It's all there, okay? And when you have somebody has mental health problems or mental illness, it's not as easy to track that journey, and there isn't a lot of backward data to look into all the different things that are working. So I think that is a real challenge in the space, is because we do not have it, unless you are fully in the system, and nobody majoritively from a mental health perspective is only dealing with the NHS or hospitalization or anything like that. I think it makes it really difficult to show all the different services that are working comparatively.
Emma, well, what do you think about that?
So I think that prevention and postvention are intrinsically linked. They are the same thing. Like, if we're doing a better job early on, like you're saying, then there's going to be less need for postvention, because there's going to be less people left behind after the worst case scenario of suicide. I think we really need to protect, so society on a whole, yes, we need to be doing more across the board, but I think that we always need to protect the most vulnerable intersections. So I think that we need to be putting more time and more money towards areas that are in poverty, because when you look at external factors, it's not just what's going on inside somebody's mind, it's also the external factors that they find themselves in. I mean, there's some incredible initiatives out there. So there's Empathy Week. We work really closely with Ed, who's a good friend. He is actively going into schools and doing a full week of teaching people empathy. You know, when you go, wow, because with empathy, not only are you teaching empathy towards others, you're also teaching empathy towards your own circumstance. So yeah, I think there's lots to be done in the education side. But I also think just talking about it is great, but I think it's actually getting past the top level conversations about mental health and going into the bad parts of it. And instead of us going, yeah, everybody has mental health and it can be good and it can be bad, and these are the umbrella terms of when it's bad, so you're depressed or you don't want to get out of bed, and all of those stereotypes. But I think it's really getting into nitty gritty, so people don't feel like their dark thoughts are darker than anyone else's.
I had a point about early intervention I've just thought about on that. So the government have now put funding through like an organisation, through local authorities, to build like early intervention, essentially right after a suicide happens, to build bereavement support after that. And that has just launched, I think, about a year ago, and the plan goes until 2024. And that was based off an incredible guy who set up Zero Suicide Alliance and a whole team of others who realized that there was no support within the system that happened once somebody had died by suicide. Whereas if you had an accident, if you were literally had your head split open and you went into hospital because of that, charities, legal aid, everything was suddenly triggered as a reaction to that. And so now the government have realized the need for that ripple effect, for that, intervention to happen at that early stage. So that is being dealt with, which is brilliant. And the other thing is there's a big movement for real-time surveillance data around suicide prevention that is incredibly interesting. There are small startups that have built amazing tech that can do things like track somebody's movement at a station or at a bridge and alert authorities as to whether that person is showing signs of suicide. And that is the type of innovation that is
the space
small, but could be incredibly impactful.
And do you think it's possible, and this is a big question, do you think it's possible to have our society which will be free of suicide, every suicide being prevented? Do you think that is a realistic outcome, or do you think there is always going to be a proportion of the population where it will occur to?
I've never been asked that question.
I'm sorry.
No, it's fine. I mean, I would say I'm like a total optimist. Yeah. And so, yes, like I would like to think of a society that didn't have any suicides. That's what I would like to go towards. But realistically, I honestly couldn't answer. I have no idea. One thing I do genuinely think is that it can come down a lot. The number can be brought down a lot. I genuinely believe that.
And I think from that very high level, if there are people who are working on the statistical level, politicians, whatever, and doing this kind of research, while suicide is never ever acceptable, like we need to be reducing those numbers down so that the proportion that have committed suicide is so small, and there are those actions can be explained in the fact that actually the safety net or security that the state is supposed to provide did everything it should have done, and in this case this wasn't meant to be. But it does seem like that gap needs to really be pushed down. Emma, what do you think?
I mean, obviously it would be wonderful if there wasn't any suicides across society, just like it'd be brilliant if there wasn't any poverty in the world and all these wonderful places that we can envisage. I don't imagine we will ever get to that place because I think there's too much of a job in the treatment to get there. So that would be the byproduct of all the other parts of society being perfect.
That's a very good point. That's a very good point. Well, but that's interesting. Exactly right. You've got flying cars. You've got a lot of technology, but actually, there's all this other extensions of ourselves, because technology is an extension of ourselves. But are we actually getting deep in there? Are we understanding there? I think we are. There's a huge amount of research onto that, but are we improving our lives fundamentally at the core so we are able to be confident, capable? I think, Emma, you mentioned the psychological effects of being in poverty. There's interesting research that shows that people do make different decisions with their money or with their situation, with their life decisions when they're in poverty and when they're not in poverty. There's a psychological, it's pervasive. It's not about money, it's about a situation, and therefore helping people out of that situation, giving people the confidence and capabilities and the coping strategies to be able to deal with some of these sorts seems like a really good place to move people from disempowered state to empowered state, right?
Yeah. And I also think the people that are making decisions and spending the budgets, are they people that fully understand it? So have they had mental health problems? Do they understand the difference between good mental health and poor mental health? Have they experienced all the problems that we're trying to fix? Because I always think it's very hard unless you've spent lots of time listening to lived experience to get it and to really understand how important it is. It's that me and Amelia are so impassioned because we are motivated by our own experience. And I think that always plays a part in what's going on in the bigger picture. Who's actually making decisions and how informed they are to be making those decisions.
And actually, it's like I said, it's empathetic policy making, isn't it? Which it does. I'm not sure if this is right or wrong, but it does seem that there is a level of empathy which is maybe missing in policy making, especially around mental health. Because I think if everyone who was making those decisions and making those policies had experienced what you both had experienced, I assume the policies might be slightly different, and the monies and the ways that the money is funneled will be slightly different. But it's awesome to hear that you are sitting on the APPGs to actually start to kind of talk to these policymakers.
And Dr. Alex George is now going to be a part, isn't he? So so hopefully we do see a little bit more of that empathy coming into the decision making.
Absolutely, yeah. And that, I mean, and to have someone like that who is, you know, very well known, especially within Britain, to take a stand on that, especially around the specific topic of suicide, that can only be an exceptionally positive thing. I'd love to talk. You know, we've talked a lot about lots of kind of existential philosophical questions. How to actually talk about Suicide&Co. You know, we've mentioned it a lot. I'd love to talk about, you know, what led you to start it. I'd love to talk about some of the resources you've got on there, the tools and tips that have helped you and helping your community along the way in terms of how to deal with some of these very difficult feelings. I'd love to start. Maybe Amelia and Emma, feel free to jump in, because this is where the stories come together.
It is indeed. So Emma and I worked together in cinema and advertising, and we had gone to a conference and we had thought it was a bit boring. We sacked it off, went and had a glass of wine and were chatting, and Emma was really the one that had twigged at the way that I was talking about my family situation, the way that I was missing out to ever talking about my mum and anything like that. She twigged that it was kind of potentially a similarity in situation. So we found out over that bottle of wine that we'd both been bereaved by suicide. You've obviously heard Emma's story. I lost my mum when I was 19. I was also at university, and we started this conversation realizing that we hadn't had conversations like this. And Emma had come up with the name Suicide&Co, you know, meaning quite literally suicide and company, trying to instill that sense of company.
Yeah.
And normalize it, right? We know it's that challenging name to play on that, like, normalization of the &Co. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say, so on that moment, so actually that conversation, actually the idea of Suicide&Co as an organization, you both wanted to do something about it from the off. That was always something that was...
No, Emma came to me about a week later being like, I want to do something in this space. Okay. And without actually asking me if I wanted to do it, I was like, I'm in.
She still hasn't asked you, has she?
No.
I actually remember what you said. You were like, are you asking me for my opinion, or are you asking me to do it with you? And I was like, the latter.
Emma, did you get a choice?
No. And yeah, brilliant. I mean, since that, it's not been a day that's gone past that we've not spoken,
which is amazing.
We just bonded over this really morbid shared experience.
Yeah. I mean, when we went into it, so we knew we wanted to do something, but I was kind of very unaware of what was out there. I knew Samaritans, I knew things like that, but we essentially conducted like a big competitor analysis, found that there were lots of suicide prevention charities locally, obviously nationally as well, and there was only one suicide bereavement charity that was national, and they're called SOBS, and they're peer-to-peer support. And then when we dug a little deeper,
what's that called? SOBS?
Suicide, survivors of bereavement by suicide. Okay, yeah, SOBS. Yeah. And they've been going around for years actually, and they offer peer-to-peer support. They've got such a stronghold nationally, really great. And then there were a few localized ones, but we were like, this is the space where there's definitely time for somebody to add something different. And for us, that was counseling. We really endorse talking therapies and counseling, and obviously self-care. So we were like, is there space? We don't want to rewrite the wheel, to come in, to offer something niche, to add to the pie rather than to try and steal share.
That cooperative approach, which is great in the charity sector, because it's like, you know, you lot over there are doing great things, but there seems to be a gap here. We want to fill it, and that passion and energy.
And that's really happening in the bereavement space a lot. There have been a lot of like niche little pop-up charities that are going, we'll do something really specific over here. And that is our approach throughout. So we kind of, back from that conversation, we launched in July of 2020. Obviously COVID hit, and we were like, God, there goes the launch party and all these plans that we'd had in our head. Let's just do it all online.
But at the same time, the need has never been greater.
Exactly.
And the beauty of that was that I was on furlough, so we had extra hands, and Amelia wasn't working either.
I was on a sabbatical, so it was great.
We were grateful for the time.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I'm still grateful for the time. We would not, still this year, we would not be able to achieve what we have. I mean, so we launched a counselling service about a month ago.
Awesome.
Which is
and it's going okay?
It's going good. I mean, it had been a lot of work up to it, and now it's there, and I'm so proud of what we can offer. We can offer 12 sessions to anyone bereaved over the age of 18 in England and Wales. It has to be 6 months past their bereavement, and that's because of the effectiveness of counselling, also where other services are currently offering. And also you can't be in other therapy because that is detrimental to have two things going on at the same time. But it's been amazing since that's happened, and I'm just incredibly proud of what we can offer, and being in this space has been amazing.
But I think what's amazing from a third party perspective, I've got to know you over several course of conversations, and being previously a Samaritan volunteer, like the topic of suicide is morbid, it is dark, it is dingy, and I suppose that's what I've been used to, and the conversations were difficult. Like what I find amazing about you both is that you turned it into something that's, I don't know, almost kind of exciting and fun, and there's still a clash in my mind. It's just like, we're talking about these conversations, and I'm feeling energetic.
Yeah.
And that's because of you guys, right? Like that's what I personally think. We love, as a sidekick, we love Suicide&Co, what you're doing, but you two in particular and your community are just full of energy and light and color. It's not black and white anymore. It's not dark. And that's what I think it's just amazing.
I am, thank you very much. I think a big part of why we've gone down that route, and with all our comms and our brand and everything, we wanted to create a community that people actually wanted to be around. So, and playing into what we were talking about earlier on about stigma and the isolation that comes with that, we wanted to throw out of a window. We wanted to say, come and join our club because you're here anyway now, and we wish that you weren't. We wish more than anything that you weren't part of a Suicide&Co collective, but now you are, so we might as well.
It may be fun.
Yeah.
I think that's a real difference between where we can play within prevention and bereavement, right? Prevention, there's a serious severity to those situations. When you've got people interacting with your service, you can actually genuinely be directly saving lives. And the severity and the seriousness that needs to happen is really, I think, quite different. On the bereavement side, it gives you a little bit more of a opportunity to try and instill that sense of hope and aspirational hope. And I think that is where we've tried to line. We have experienced bereavement charities that feel like and other mental health charities that feel like you're in a doctor's waiting room, that I don't resonate with any of this doesn't make me feel good. It can also make me feel like very victimized. And we know that we have consciously chosen to go in a different direction. It's not going to be for everyone, and there's lots of resources out there that are more like that. But I think trying to be a bit different, like you've touched on, is what we were trying to hope. Like, we've got people walking around with our bracelets that start conversations around, this is to do with Suicide&Co. We've got prints in people's houses. We've got things that you just wouldn't get into people's lives in that level of integration if you weren't trying to play on something that they also resonated with.
And I think by the action of how you're approaching this, it is, you are destigmatizing it by its very nature. And I have this, the same sentence comes out of my mouth every episode we make, is that despite us all having loads of conversations about it, are the stats getting better? And the reality is, it seems like the answer is no. That doesn't mean we need to stop having the conversations at all. But what I do love is that idea of that integration, and Emma, for those of you who are on the video, we saw a lovely tour of your place. Not at all. But the point is that when you go around someone's place, having something that's physical, that is on the wall, that might, which will, it turns that kind of that kind of very dark, negative, tragic time into something that's hopeful and light and positive, and something that you'll walk past every day. It's like doing that journaling every day or breathing exercise, whatever it is. You walk past it, it's a trigger of hope, it's a trigger of optimism, and it really feels like you're doing something very, very different, which is very exciting.
We hope so.
I agree with the name. One of the things that people have said to me more and more, even if they're giving us a compliment about the service or about the website, they'll be like, also, like, I legit feel way more normal talking about suicide now. Just the word. People that it's in my family, I'm like, you've definitely normalized that word for us more. And I'm like, even these tiny comments are where we need to move to. Yeah. I think the same for Sidekick, in the fact that building it into an app, building it into a user journey and a user experience I am so used to experiencing, that level of integration into my usual behaviors is the reason why things like Sidekick are so important. That, you know, I don't have to read a big self-help book and it'll tell me all about gratitude, and then I'll go and buy myself a beautiful journal.
Exactly. I mean, that barrier to entry is high, right?
It's high.
I want to do it now.
Yeah, exactly. And this is the point of those things. Let's just take away the barriers and give people lots of different options.
Yeah. And Emma, I'd love to understand, so you've been working in this space, or both of you working in this space for, let's say the last almost a year, coming up to a year now. Have you found the space as cooperative as you would have hoped? And obviously, mention no names, but our experience, working in the charity space is that people still run them like businesses, right? Have you found that people are cooperative? Have you found that people are very open to your ideas, or have you found that there are some silos that do need to be surmounted?
So from a social media angle and from what's going on in that space, I think the grief community is incredibly welcoming and really helping propel us. However, as you say, they are not necessarily charities. So when it comes to that human interaction, people are loving it and they're going, oh, we love how you look, we love what you stand for, let's like join forces. From the charity side, people have been really kind with their time and their experience and making room, especially for Amelia, because Amelia does much more of that side of it. So people are giving us a wealth of their knowledge and their understanding, which has been invaluable. I think that there's always room for more collaboration. I think when it comes to sharing content and being on the same path to get to the end product of mental health stigma being minimized and suicide bereavement being a bit more welcoming and the isolation being eradicated, I think that there's plenty of support around that. When it comes to fundraising, it's a no-brainer. People don't like to cannibalize the fundraising market because we're all trying to ask people for their hard-earned cash to help our personal missions. So unsurprisingly, people are less collaborative on that side. I think that's fair enough. But from a bigger picture, Amelia, what do you think? Because you're closer to that.
I actually agree with everything you've just said. Like Instagram, this lovely, friendly, let's all hold hands.
Yeah.
Love it. Like when we first joined, we were like, oh my God, we did a competitor analysis on like charities. Who are all these people? Do we need to exist? And then we're like, okay, they're doing so much in that space, but we can help with the service side of things. I think there's lots of collaboration out there. One of the things that frustrates me the most, and this comes back to the government side, is we have spent hours trying to understand who's out there in England and Wales. And I think I'm quite a good researcher. Like we go on, we create spreadsheet after spreadsheet, and I'm still finding people that I didn't know that exist locally, regionally, that will do something. They won't say suicide bereavement on the tin. They'll say this, all of this different stuff. For me, this responsibility should be within government or within a central organization to be like, why are these databases not more easy to find? Like everybody that asks me for a directory, I'll share my directory with absolutely everyone. You have it. It's taken us hours to build, but I don't care. Like, don't go and do the work yourself. It's a waste of volunteer time. So for me, in the sector, that mode of collaboration is more what I'm interested in. Like, let's not rewrite the wheel. Let's figure out how we can complement each other.
Yeah, it's the utilitarian notion, isn't it, of We just want to do the best for the largest amount of people.
Yeah.
And if that means us pulling together here in this sector, then let's just do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was going to say, and it does seem to me that like that kind of idea around that directory repository, especially if you can align not only the names of the organizations with their missions, you can start to group and categorize and say, okay, well, this group are, you know, and then, okay, after that, you can do some impact analysis of how effective these groups and organizations are. It seems like a much better way to kind of target funding. And say, actually, this group, we're going to set up a fund for you. It's going to be, that makes it less competitive, right? It's going to, actually, the fund, there's enough money for all of you small organizations, because these small organizations, you know, you're not talking about having turnovers of millions of pounds. You're talking tens of thousands of pounds, and run by communities of passionate volunteers, you know, who are motivated by the fact that they've been through these lived experiences. Like, there are better ways to be able to do that. And then if there is an organization like yourselves who are great at fundraising and one who don't have that capacity, well, you know, it can be a coordinated, collaborative approach, right?
I agree. And why is there, and I know because I've got this founder mindset myself, but why there are so many people that will go and start something up on their own or go and do something off here, and I'm like, when I see that fragmented landscape, I'm like, how do you solve that problem? That goes, we're an organization that is so open that if you have an idea that you want to do and go and do something, come and do it with us. We've already got the audience. I would urge everybody to say that. It's a real, more so in prevention than bereavement, but in prevention, there's a significant problem with people going out and doing their own things, and now more trusts are being created which then funnel into those bigger charities, which I think is, or smaller charities, whatever, which is brilliant. There's got to be a solution to kind of bringing everybody together, because at the moment the most important thing is, as the client, the consumer, the person, the individual, it's fucking confusing.
And I think, like, you know, just to kind of tie things up, I'd love to understand from a personal basis, but also within your community as well, the tools, the tips that have helped you along your way that might be invaluable to people listening in this, in the context of suicide related grief, bereavement, or just your general mental health as you are, you know, 10 years into that journey.
So I'll go first. General mental health. We were actually talking about this early on. Sleep. Make sure that you rest and you sleep and you recharge your brain and your body. That's always and I know that's the simplest thing to say, but I'm a big believer that has the biggest impact on. And again, it's free. It's free. And I mean, something a bit random, but really got into aromatherapy oil at the minute. Diffusers. So I'm using eucalyptus one in the day to engage my brain, and then at night, and then at night I'm using a neroli one, and it's working. It is a treat. And but that's the thing, it works. So carry on. And I think with everything, do what works for you. You can read 1 million self-help books and listen to all of us with our wonderful advice. If it doesn't fit, then just keep on looking. I think with the grief side, and my advice around tools, and I know that everyone isn't lucky enough to just pick out a lifelong friend who also has a same experience, but I would say find a confidant who you can talk about anything with. Non-judgmental listening is the biggest skill that everybody should try and learn, because if you are actively not judging someone else, you're teaching other people to listen with the same intent as you. And just research your experience and your thoughts, and just know that you're not alone. Life and death, it comes hand in hand, doesn't it? And whether or not, we call it the grief Olympics. So everybody experiences loss at some point in your life. You will sadly lose someone, and it's not about suicide loss is worse than any other loss, because we don't believe that. It's a case of processing your own loss and knowing that grief is a communal thing that everybody will go through. So that's it from me. I was going to say, you're making me well up. Those are incredibly wise words. Amelia.
Oh God, how am I going to do anything? So no, I would say that for suicide, bereavement, grief, I would say my tips would be journaling. Gratitude journaling was the most amazing thing. And also, I guess, less of a tool, but something that's been really impactful to me is counseling. Like, I needed the space a safe space to be able to have those thoughts and say what I wanted to out loud. I think that has been impactful on all parts of my life. Actually, I've also really struggled with weight my whole life, and it's massively impacted my mental health negatively. And it wasn't until I had CBT therapy, and I only had a small dose, that really made me realize the active and I think a lot of people do this for anxiety as well, the active tool of actually catching your thoughts and being able to challenge them. I essentially had a constant negative ticker tape of horrible things that I was saying to myself, and building those practices. And you don't just need CBT therapy. You can find resources online. You can find different, it's very similar to anxiety techniques, to basically train yourself to be able to catch your negative thoughts. It was life-changing for me, and it has been the biggest thing that's kind of turned my head around in that space and given me the brain. I'm like, oh my God, there's so much time that I was spending being horrible to myself. And when I don't have that, I can do a lot of other things.
And I think on that, and apologize for the shameless psychic self-promotion, there is an exercise within the app which has been designed with enormous amounts of time and care. It's free. It enables you to catch your thoughts, check your thoughts, reframe your thoughts. It is based on CBT. It is fully verified, fully credible. Those tools and techniques are available, and they are available for free. So I'm really pleased that you said that, because it makes me think, oh, I'm really glad we spent time on that.
Oh my gosh, it's incredible. I do not think enough people know how to do it, and it is for so many situations the most incredible tool to be able to have. And the fact that it lives in Sidekick for free, that you can practice, you can keep doing it, is just amazing.
Yeah.
Well, Amelia and Emma, thank you so much for not only a fascinating, insightful conversation, but just one full of energy and hope and joy. And frankly, you are both two inspirational people, which we love supporting and we want to support, and everyone else should support. I'm not just saying that because hopefully you've come over the last hour of our conversation, you've realized that the topic of suicide and grief actually doesn't need to be a conversation that people will never have. It's something that can be had. And these conversations, whilst are very difficult, they're rewarding as well. Like, frankly, this conversation will have and has had made my day. And I think other people having these kind of conversations, it will make your day too.
Brilliant.
Thank you so much for having us. It's been amazing. I can't believe it's been an hour. That's gone so quick. You're amazing. Thank you so much.
Honestly, no, thank you so much. And just to plug yourselves as well, your website is suicide&co.org. I wish you all the luck and love in the world.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And thank you to everyone listening. You can subscribe to us on most major podcast platforms, YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Just search for Sidekick Community and Psychic Stories and we'll pop up. Please do give us a rating if you like the show. And now for the 50th time, I'm going to mention our free Psychic app for iPhone and iPad, a collection of interactive exercises, tools and tips to help you boost your mental well-being. The app enables you to build a personalized well-being toolkit to help you deal with life's ups and downs. And as the conversations we've had, there are instances where tragedy hits and you don't, it is one of life's challenges, and unfortunately everyone will go through those challenges, and what we're trying to do is really help that, is to really help, treat your life as a user journey, so that at every stage you've got support in your pocket when you need it. Just go to our website, www.sidekick.org.uk, and click the download now button in the header to take you to the App Store. Amelia and Emma, thank you so much again.
Thank you.
Bye.